My life ran on a schedule of quiet precision. The alarm went off at 5:30. Coffee brewed by 5:45. In the workshop by 6, with the scent of sawdust and shellac to greet me like old friends. I made furniture. Not the flat-pack garbage that buckled under the weight of a few paperbacks, but real, solid, heirloom pieces. Things made of oak and walnut and cherry, joined with dovetails and mortise and tenon. It was a life of straight lines, right angles, and predictable outcomes. A life I had built for myself after the last one had crumbled. I was 36 years old, divorced for 4 of them. My ex-wife, Marissa, had left with the quiet sigh of a slow puncture. There was no grand explosion, no screaming matches. Just a gradual deflation until one day she announced she was gone. Her reasoning was as polite as it was soul-crushing. I was, in her words, a wonderful man. I was dependable. I was safe. The word hung in the air between us like a verdict. Safe. The kind of thing you want in a minivan or a savings bond, not a husband. She wanted adventure, spontaneity, a life that wasn't measured in 64th of an inch increments. I couldn't blame her. My world was built on foundations, and she wanted to fly. So I settled into my quiet life. My house, my workshop, my predictable solitude. It wasn't a bad life. It was just muted, the volume turned down low. I had mistaken caution for wisdom, building walls of routine and calling it peace. I was emotionally stagnant, a placid pond that hadn't seen a ripple in years. I was fine. That's what I told my brother, David, on our weekly calls. And I almost believed it. Then the moving truck arrived next door. The house to my left had been empty for 6 months, a silent placeholder on our sleepy suburban street. The arrival of a lumbering, diesel-belching truck was the most excitement we'd had since a rogue squirrel chewed through Mrs. Gable's Christmas lights. I watched from my workshop window, feigning an intense interest in a piece of sandpaper. A woman emerged from a dusty sedan, her hair pulled back in a messy but effective ponytail. She wore jeans and a t-shirt that had seen better days, and she moved with an energy that seemed to push back against the humid July air. A boy, maybe 8 or 9, scrambled out after her, all knees and elbows and a shock of dark hair that matched hers. He immediately started exploring the yard, cataloging its deficiencies with the brutal honesty of a child. The grass is all patchy. Are there snakes? Only the charming, non-venomous kind, she called back, her voice carrying a note of wry exhaustion. She turned her attention to the 2 movers who were wrestling with the ramp at the back of the truck. She wasn't directing them so much as collaborating, pointing and suggesting with a calm authority that they seemed to instantly respect. There was no flustered helplessness, no performative damsel in distress routine. She was simply a person with a job to do, and she was getting it done. I found myself captivated. It wasn't just that she was attractive, which she was in a real and unvarnished way. It was her composure. The set of her jaw was determined, but the corners of her eyes crinkled with a humor that suggested she wasn't taking any of this too seriously. She was a single point of failure system, holding her small family's world together, and she wasn't buckling under the pressure. She was the polar opposite of the fragile, decorative women I'd occasionally been set up with on disastrous blind dates. This woman looked like she could field strip a carburetor and then explain the thematic nuances of a foreign film. I went back to my sanding, the rhythmic scrape of grit on with a familiar comfort. But my focus was shot. My mind kept drifting to the sounds next door, the rumble of the dolly on the pavement, the muffled thuds of boxes, her clear voice cutting through the noise. I told myself it was just a novelty, a new neighbor, nothing more. But a part of me, the part one kept locked down and sedated with routine, felt a faint, unfamiliar flicker, a ripple on the pond. Later that afternoon, the movers were gone. The truck had rumbled away, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. I saw her on the porch, wrestling with a large, flat box that was clearly winning. She'd pivot it one way, and it would jam in the doorway. She'd try the other, and it would get caught on the threshold. Her son, Sam, was offering helpful advice from the lawn. Just push it harder. Brilliant, honey. Why didn't I think of that? she grunted, her voice strained. This was the moment. The neighborly thing to do. Offer help. My brain, the cautious, overthinking part, immediately started listing the cons. It would be an intrusion. She seemed capable. She didn't need my help. It would lead to conversation, expectations. It was simpler to stay in my workshop, in my safe, controlled world. But then she straightened up, put her hands on her hips, and let out a sigh that was a perfect blend of frustration and amusement. She looked at the box as if it had personally insulted her ancestors. And in that moment, she wasn't just a capable stranger. She was a person having a genuinely bad time with a bed frame. My feet started moving before my brain could file a formal objection. I wiped my dusty hands on my jeans and walked across the lawn that separated our properties. "Looks like you're having a disagreement with that box," I said, my voice sounding rusty from disuse. She turned, and for the first time, I saw her face up close. Her eyes were a warm, intelligent brown, currently narrowed at the offending cardboard. A smudge of dirt streaked across one cheek. She didn't look startled or embarrassed to be caught in a moment of struggle. She just looked resigned. "We're in counseling," she said, her voice dry as tinder. "But I think this relationship is irreparable." She offered a hand, her grip firm and confident. "I'm Claire. This is my co-conspirator, Sam." "Leo," I said, shaking her hand. "I live there," I nodded toward my house. "That looks like a king-size problem." "It's a queen, but it has the ego of a king," she quipped. "It's Sam's new bed. Apparently, his old one was too babyish. It seems the path to manhood is paved with Allen keys and incomprehensible diagrams." "I speak fluent Swedish flat pack," I said, "and I have tools that don't double as torture implements. If you'll let me." A flicker of something crossed her face. Relief, maybe, but also a careful evaluation. I was used to that look. Women sizing me up, trying to figure out if I was a creep. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, letting her assess. The silence stretched for a beat. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I'm pretty sure assembling this thing is a violation of the Geneva Conventions. I wouldn't want to make you an accessory." "I like a challenge," I said. "Besides, it's better than listening to Mrs. Gable 2 doors down interrogate the mailman again." A genuine smile broke through her exhaustion, and it transformed her face. It was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Deal," she said. "But I'm warning you. I pay in lukewarm coffee and eternal gratitude. The gratitude is negotiable." "I'll take the gratitude," I said. My caffeine addiction is already a finely tuned machine. Together, we wrangled the box through the door. The inside of her house was a chaotic canyon of cardboard. Towers of boxes labeled kitchen and books and Sam stuff. "Do not lose," formed a maze. It smelled of cardboard, dust, and the faint, clean scent of whatever soap she used. It smelled like a beginning. We navigated the maze to Sam's new room. It was a blank slate, empty except for a few treasured possessions he'd clearly unpacked first. A row of meticulously arranged superhero figures on the windowsill and a poster of a nebula tacked crookedly to the wall. "Okay," Clara said, slitting the box open with a key. "Let's see what fresh hell this is." Inside was a baffling collection of pre-drilled particle board, a Ziploc bag full of more screws and dowels than seemed mathematically possible, and a single, cryptic sheet of instructions. Sam looked at it with wide eyes. "It looks like a treasure map for a really boring treasure." Clara laughed, a full, throaty sound. "You're not wrong, kiddo." She looked at me. "So, a wise one of the workshop. Where do we begin?" For the next 2 hours, we worked. Or rather, I worked and she assisted, handing me pieces, sorting screws, and keeping up a running commentary that was far more entertaining than any podcast. She was witty, her humor sharp and self-deprecating. She told me about their move from the city, her job as a graphic designer, and Sam's obsession with astrophysics. I found myself talking, too, more than I had in years to a stranger. I told her about my furniture business, about the satisfaction of taking a raw piece of wood and giving it new life. I didn't mention Marissa. I didn't mention the divorce or the soul-crushing diagnosis of being safe. I just talked about the work. Clara was an incredible listener. She didn't just wait for her turn to speak. She asked questions, real questions. She wanted to know the difference between a dovetail and a box joint. She asked what my favorite wood was to work with, walnut, for its color and temperament. She looked at my hands, calloused and stained from my work, not with disgust, but with a kind of interest, as if they were telling a story. Sam, after determining I was not a threat, decided to supervise. He sat cross-legged on the floor, providing a stream of consciousness narration of the building process, occasionally helping by holding a piece of wood, his small hands dwarfed by the task. "You're good with him," Clara said quietly during a moment when Sam was engrossed in explaining the life cycle of a red giant to a wooden bed slat. "He's a good kid," I replied, tightening a hex bolt. "Smart. He gets that from me," she said with a completely straight face. His father contributed the height and a stunning inability to find his own car keys. It was the first mention of him. The comment was light, but there was a history coiled beneath it. I didn't press. I just grunted in what I hoped was a sympathetic manner and focused on aligning the headboard. My world was simple. Hers was not. A bright red line in my mind told me to remember that. We finished the bed just as the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the floor. It was solid, level, and ready for a mattress. It wasn't a masterpiece of woodworking, but it was done. "Behold," I said, stepping back with a mock flourish. "A place for sleeping." Sam immediately scrambled onto it, bouncing up and down. "It's solid. It doesn't even wobble." Clara was looking at the bed, but her expression was somewhere else. "Thank you, Leo," she said, her voice softer now. "Seriously, I would have been here until midnight, probably crying, with a half-built pile of kindling." "Any time," I said, starting to gather my tools. The comfortable bubble of the last 2 hours was dissipating. It was time to retreat to my side of the lawn, back to the safety of my routine. "At least let me get you that coffee," she insisted. "It's probably still lukewarm." Before I could politely decline, a voice cut through the air from the front porch. "Clara? Is anyone home?" Clara's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "In here, Mrs. Gable." An older woman with a helmet of perfectly coiffed silver hair and eyes that could find a secret in a sealed vault appeared in the doorway. This was the mailman interrogator herself. She took in the scene, me with a drill in my hand, Clara standing nearby, the messy room, the new bed. Her gaze lingered on me for a second too long. "Oh," settling in, "I see," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "I'm Eleanor Gable from 2 doors down. The welcoming committee." You could say she didn't extend a hand. "Clara," Clara said, her tone polite but cool. "And this is my son, Sam." Mrs. Gable's eyes flicked back to me. "And you've already hired a handyman." So efficient. The word hung in the air, just like Safe had all those years ago. Handyman. It wasn't an insult, not technically, but it was a label, a box. It was meant to define and dismiss me in a single stroke. I saw a flash of annoyance in Clara's eyes. She opened her mouth to correct her, but I spoke first. I offered Mrs. Gable a small, pleasant smile. "Leo," I said, extending a hand I knew she wouldn't shake. "I'm a neighbor, just helping out. It's what we do on this street. Right, Mrs. Gable? I seem to recall helping you with that sprinkler head last summer." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She had, in fact, flagged me down in a panic when her sprinkler had gone rogue and started machine gunning water at passing cars. I had fixed it in 5 minutes. She'd forgotten, or, more likely, had chosen to categorize me as useful yard man and filed the memory away. "Oh, of course," she said, recovering quickly. "Now, you're the wood fellow." "The very same," I said, my smile not wavering. I turned my attention back to Clara, effectively ending my part of the conversation with Mrs. Gable. The headboard bolts might need a final tightening after the mattress is on, but it should be solid. "Thank you, Leo," Clara said, and the way she said my name was different. It was deliberate, an underline. She was reinforcing my identity against Mrs. Gable's label. "I really appreciate it." Mrs. Gable, realizing she was no longer the center of attention, offered a few more pleasantries about recycling day and the neighborhood watch, and then departed, promising to bring over a casserole once things are less hectic. The moment she was gone, the air in the room changed. The tension drained away, replaced by something else. Something warm. Clara leaned against the doorframe, a small, wry smile on her face. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt it like a physical touch. "The Woodfellow," she said, shaking her head. "It's better than Sprinkler Guy." I shrugged, trying to make light of it. My heart was beating a little faster than it should have been. "You handled that with an impressive amount of grace," she said. Her smile faded, and her expression turned serious, perceptive. "You have a very quiet way about you, Leo. My ex-husband would have called that weakness." I froze, my hand hovering over my toolbox. The ghost of Marissa was in the room, nodding in agreement. "Safe, predictable, quiet. But it's not weakness, is it?" Clara continued, her gaze unwavering. She was dissecting me, and for the first time in my life, it didn't feel like an attack. It felt like she was seeing the real schematics. "It's deliberate. You choose your words. You choose your actions. There's a strength in that, a stillness. Most people are just noise. I had no defense for that. It was the most astute observation anyone had ever made about me. She hadn't just seen my quietness. She had understood it. She had defined it not as a lack of something, but as the presence of something else. Stillness. Control. She saw strength where Marissa had seen boredom. I think I just stared at her for a full 10 seconds, my mind completely blank. The man who chose his words, had none. The ripple on the pond had just turned into a wave, and it was washing away years of carefully constructed defenses. For the first time in a very long time, I felt seen, truly and completely seen. I finally managed to sound clumsy and loud in the quiet room. "I should go. Let you get back to unpacking." She nodded, but the small smile returned to her lips. It was a knowing smile. "Okay, Leo the Woodfellow," she said softly. "But that offer for lukewarm coffee is a standing one." I managed to nod, grab my tools, and made my escape. As I walked across the grass back to my own quiet house, the evening air felt cooler, sharper. The world seemed a little less muted. The volume had been turned up just a notch, and it was terrifying, and it was exhilarating. I went into my workshop, but I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood there in the dark, surrounded by the familiar scent of wood and work, and thought about the woman next door who had seen right through me. The next few days passed in a strange haze. I stuck to my routine, but it felt different, like I was just going through the motions. My workshop, usually my sanctuary, felt more like a hiding place. I'd find myself pausing, listening for sound from next door, the slam of a car door, Sam's laughter, Clara's voice on the phone. I'd catch a glimpse of her through the window, watering the sad-looking petunias the previous owners had left behind, and my stomach would do a slow, awkward flip. This was precisely the kind of complication I had structured my life to avoid. She was a neighbor, a single mother. She had an ex. Her life was a tangled knot of responsibilities and histories, while mine was a single, straight thread. And yet, her words echoed in my head. "It's not weakness. It's deliberate." I avoided her. Not obviously, but effectively. I took my coffee on the back porch instead of the front. I went to the lumber yard earlier than usual. I was a coward, hiding behind a wall of Douglas fir and routine. I was terrified of the feeling she'd sparked in me, that jolt of being understood. It was a vulnerability I hadn't felt since before Marissa, and I had no idea what to do with it. On Saturday morning, the complication arrived in a cloud of dust and arrogance. I was in my garage, sharpening a set of chisels, the rhythmic hiss of steel on stone a familiar meditation. A low-slung, obscenely expensive-looking black sports car growled to a stop at the curb in front of Claire's house. It was the kind of car that screamed, "My personality is my net worth." The driver's side door opened, and a man unfolded himself from the cockpit. He was tall, dressed in clothes that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. A crisp linen shirt, tailored trousers, shoes that looked like they'd never touched actual pavement. His hair was perfectly styled, and he wore sunglasses that probably had their own zip code. He radiated an aura of effortless superiority. This had to be him, the ex, the contributor of height and key misplacing abilities. He didn't knock on the door. He just strode up the walkway and let himself in a casual act of ownership that made my jaw tighten. A few minutes later, he emerged with Sam, who was carrying a small backpack. Sam looked less than thrilled. The man, I mentally christened him Julian, ruffled Sam's hair in a way that seemed more for show than genuine affection. Clara appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. Her body language was a fortress. Even from my garage, I could feel the tension radiating across the lawn. They exchanged a few words, too low for me to hear, but the tone was clear. His was condescendingly placating. Hers was clipped and tense. This was my cue to disappear, to retreat further into the shadows of my garage, mind my own business, and pretend I hadn't seen a thing. It was the safe, sensible thing to do. So, naturally, I chose that exact moment to carry a bag of sawdust to the trash can at the end of my driveway. It was a completely unnecessary trip. I was manufacturing a reason to be present, to be a silent, neighboring witness. A small, pathetic act of solidarity. Julian's eyes, hidden behind his expensive sunglasses, swiveled to me as I walked down the driveway. He did a slow, deliberate scan, from my worn work boots to my sawdust-dusted t-shirt. It was a dismissive, insect-level appraisal. I could feel him categorizing me, pricing me out, and finding me wanting. "Clara, darling," he said, his voice a smooth, condescending purr that carried easily across the lawn. "Are you having work done already? You really should have consulted me. I have a contractor who does excellent work. Not this." He gestured vaguely in my direction, a flick of the wrist that dismissed my entire existence. My hands clenched on the trash bag. The sawdust inside felt like it was about to ignite. This. He called me this. Clara's posture went from fortress to battleship. "His name is Leo," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "He's my neighbor, and I don't need to consult you on anything, Julian. We've been over this." Of course, he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. He turned his attention back to me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Now, the neighbor. My apologies." For a moment, I thought Clara had finally embraced her bohemian phase. He winked, a slimy, conspiratorial gesture. "Just a friendly tip. She has a weakness for Italian food and a deep-seated hatred for carnations. Remember that." He was marking his territory. He was trying to establish a shared history, an intimacy that explicitly excluded me. He was telling me, in the clearest possible terms, that I was an amateur trespassing on professional ground. He saw me as no threat, just a temporary diversion, a handyman, a woodfellow. The same tired, condescending labels. My first instinct was to say something cutting, to use my own quiet wit to slice him down a size. But then I looked at Clara. Her face was a mask of controlled fury. Her fight wasn't with me. It was with him. My entering the fray would only escalate it, make it about two men posturing over her. She didn't need a champion. She needed an ally. And sometimes, the most powerful move is to refuse to play the game. So I just looked at Julian. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I just held his gaze until he was the one to look away, his smirk faltering slightly. I gave a short, non-committal nod, dumped the sawdust bag into the bin with a definitive thud, and walked back to my garage without another word. It was a retreat, but it felt like a tactical one. I had refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. From the corner of my eye, I saw Clara lean in and say something to him, her voice a low, angry buzz. He stiffened. He herded Sam into the car, shot one last, unreadable look toward my house, and then peeled away from the curb with an obnoxious roar of the engine, leaving the scent of overpriced gasoline and entitlement in his wake. Clara stood on her porch for a long moment, watching the car disappear. Her shoulders were slumped. The battleship had become a lone figure on the shore after a storm. She wrapped her arms around herself, looking small and suddenly very tired. I wanted to go to her. I wanted to walk across that lawn, put a hand on her shoulder, and say, "What? Sorry your ex is a world-class jackass? Don't worry about it." Everything sounded hollow and inadequate. All my carefully chosen words failed me. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken things. She hadn't looked my way. She probably wanted to be alone. I was an embarrassing reminder of the scene that had just played out. The handyman her ex had mocked. She finally turned and went back inside, the screen door sighing shut behind her. The silence that fell over the street was profound. My sanctuary, my workshop, now felt like a prison of my own making. Her quiet strength was a beacon, but her life was surrounded by turbulent waters. And I was a man who had built his entire world on dry land, terrified of getting wet. My caution, which she had so generously reframed as strength, now felt exactly like what Marissa had always said it was: fear. The rest of the weekend was a study in quiet agony. Every time I thought about walking over, my brain compiled a comprehensive, bullet-pointed list of reasons why it was a terrible idea. She's dealing with her ex. She needs space. You just make it awkward. What would you even say? The internal monologue was relentless, a self-deprecating filibuster designed to keep me in my place. By Monday evening, I had worked myself into a state of complete paralysis. I'd spent the day planing a set of cherry boards for a dining table, the repetitive motion usually a balm for my overactive mind. But today it did nothing. My thoughts kept drifting across the lawn, to the house where the lights were on, where a life was happening that felt infinitely more real and complex than my own. I was standing at my kitchen sink, staring out the window at her house when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "This is Clara. I hope you don't mind. I got your number from the welcome packet Mrs. Gable left. It also contains a truly terrifying Jell-O salad recipe. Be warned." My heart did a painful little lurch. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on something neutral. "No problem, and thanks for the warning. I'm not a Jell-O guy." The 3 little dots appeared immediately. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, waiting. "Can you come over for a second? I need an expert opinion on something." My mind raced. A leaky faucet? A sticking window? Another piece of demonic Swedish furniture? "Sure. What's up?" "I think there's a sound in my bedroom. In the wall. It's a weird, faint clicking. I was hoping you could take a listen. It's driving me crazy." A sound in her bedroom. My brain, already on high alert, went into overdrive. This was intimate. A bedroom. Her bedroom. The request was perfectly normal, a neighborly ask. But after the tension of the weekend, it felt loaded with significance. It felt like a test. "Be right there," I typed, my hands feeling clumsy. I splashed some water on my face, ran a hand through my hair, and told myself to be a normal human being. "It's a noise. In a wall. Pipes, probably. Or a squirrel. This is a simple, mechanical problem. You are a simple, mechanical man. You can handle this." I walked across the lawn, the grass cool and damp under my feet. The evening was quiet, the sky a deep, bruised purple. When I knocked on her door, she opened it immediately, as if she'd been waiting right behind it. She was wearing a soft gray sweater and leggings, her hair was down, and she looked tired. But her eyes were clear and direct. "Hey," she said, her voice low. "Thanks for coming." "No problem," I said, stepping inside. The house was quieter without Sam. The boxes were mostly gone, replaced by the beginnings of a home. A few paintings were on the walls. A stack of books sat on a coffee table. It was starting to look like her. "It's this way," she said, leading me up the stairs. My footsteps felt unnaturally loud on the wooden steps. I was hyper-aware of everything. The faint scent of lavender and something uniquely her, the way the dim light from the hallway caught in her hair, the fact that I was following her to her bedroom. My internal monologue was screaming at me to abort the mission. Her room was simple and elegant. A large, unmade bed dominated the space. A drafting table stood by the window, covered in sketches and colored pencils. It was a room that was both a sanctuary and a workspace. It was intensely personal. I felt like an intruder. "Okay," she said, stopping in the middle of the room. "It's over here, by the window." I walked over, my boots feeling clumsy on her hardwood floor. I stood where she indicated and listened. I closed my eyes, trying to focus, to block out the frantic thumping of my own pulse. I listened for the faint clicking she described. There was nothing. Just the gentle hum of the house, the distant whisper of traffic, the sound of my own breathing. I strained my ears, tilting my head. Still nothing. No clicking. No scratching. No pipes. Just silence. A deep, profound silence. I stayed there for a full minute, pretending to be concentrating, my mind spinning. Was I deaf? Had stopped? Or I opened my eyes and looked at her. She was watching me, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable but intense. She wasn't looking at the wall. She was looking at me. I don't hear anything, I said finally, my voice quiet. She didn't seem surprised. She just held my gaze. There's no sound, is there, Leo? She asked, her voice soft but carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. My stomach dropped. This wasn't about a noise. This was never about a noise. This was a summons, an interrogation. I had walked straight into an ambush of emotional honesty, and I was completely unarmed. No, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. There's no sound. She took a small step closer. The space between us shrank, becoming charged and significant. Then why have you been so quiet? She asked, her voice gentle but insistent. Ever since Saturday. Ever since Julian. The question was a scalpel, precise and sharp, cutting right to the heart of the matter. There was no hiding, no deflecting. She had called me out, not with anger, but with a kind of concerned curiosity. She wanted an answer. She deserved one. All the excuses I'd been rehearsing, all the polite evasions, they all evaporated. They were useless in the face of her directness. I was left with only the truth, ugly and insecure as it was. I let out a long breath, the sound loud in the silent room. I leaned a hand against the wall, needing the support. Because your life is complicated, I said, the words feeling like stones I was pulling from my own throat. And mine isn't. You have him. You have a history. It's messy. Life is messy, she countered softly. That's not an answer. He looked at me. I continued, the memory of Julian's smug face flashing in my mind, and he saw exactly what my ex-wife saw. A handyman. A boring, predictable, safe guy. A temporary fixture. And for 3 days, I've been wondering if he was right. The confession was humiliating, but it was honest. It was the deepest gear of my anxiety, laid bare on her bedroom floor. I finally looked up from the floorboards and met her eyes. And I've been wondering why someone like you, someone with all that light and strength, would even bother with someone who spends his days hiding in a workshop. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was full, holding the weight of my admission. Claire's expression had softened. The interrogator was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. Empathy? Understanding. Do you want to know what I see when I look at you, Leo? She asked, her voice a low murmur. She took another step, closing the remaining distance between us. She was so close now, I could feel the warmth radiating from her. I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. I don't see a handyman. I see a craftsman. I see a man whose hands can create beautiful, lasting things from nothing. I see the man who patiently taught my son the difference between a Phillips and a flathead. I see the man who stood up to a nosy neighbor with quiet dignity and who refused to be drawn into a stupid, pissing contest with my arrogant ex-husband. She reached out and lightly touched my arm. Her fingers were warm. The contact sent a jolt through my entire system, a current of pure, unadulterated shock. Julian, she said, her voice laced with an old bitterness, values things that glitter. Cars, clothes, appearances. He's all surface, no substance. That's why I left him. He spent 10 years trying to shape me into a pretty accessory for his life, and he never once saw the real me. He doesn't know how. Her eyes bored into mine, and I felt stripped bare, but not in a bad way. It was like she was seeing past the walls I'd built, past the fear and the caution, and looking directly at the person I was, the person I hoped to be. You, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You saw me. In the middle of a messy move, covered in dirt, wrestling with a stupid box, you saw me. And you didn't offer pity. You offer help. And then you listened. Julian never listens. She moved her hand from my arm to my chest, right over my heart, which was now hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I don't want a man who glitters, Leo. I want a man who's solid, who's deliberate, who's still, her own words thrown back at me, not as an accusation, but as a compliment, a validation. The air crackled. The space between our faces was now measured in inches. I could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. I could smell the lavender in her hair. My carefully constructed world of right angles and straight lines was collapsing into a beautiful, terrifying singularity right here in this room. Clara, I breathed, her name an exhale. There was no sound in the wall, she whispered. The only noise was you in my head, being quiet, and I didn't like it. And then she closed the final inch. Her lips met mine. It wasn't a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a statement. It was firm and sure and full of all the unspoken things that had been hanging in the air between us for days. It was a kiss that said, I see you. I choose this. I'm not afraid. My mind, for the first time in a decade, went completely silent. All the overthinking, all the fear, all the self-doubt, it vanished. There was only the feeling of her lips on mine, the warmth of her hand on my chest, the sense of a connection so profound it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. I brought my hands up to cup her face, my callous thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. I kissed her back, pouring every ounce of my own unspoken hope and fear and longing into it. It was a confession more honest than any words I could have spoken. It was the demolition of my old, safe life and the laying of a new, uncertain, and infinitely more promising foundation. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. We just stood there, foreheads resting against each other, the silence of the room no longer empty, but filled with a new and potent energy. So, she murmured, a smile in her voice. I guess we're not going to be quiet anymore. No, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I don't think so. The awkwardness that had plagued me for days was gone, replaced by a startling clarity. The kiss hadn't just been a physical act, it had been a decision, a mutual agreement to step off the ledge of our respective solitudes and see if we could fly, or at least fall, together. I should probably confess, she said, her eyes twinkling as she pulled back just enough to look at me, that the Jell-O salad recipe was real. It involves lime gelatin and shredded carrots. It's a culinary war crime. I laughed, a real, unburdened laugh that felt like it came from my toes. I'll consider myself warned. Good, she said, her smile softening. Now, about that lukewarm coffee I owe you. I think I can do better. I have a bottle of wine that isn't fancy, but it's not trying to be. I like that, I said. I like that very much. We went downstairs, not as two separate neighbors, but as two people who had just crossed a significant, invisible line. She opened the wine while I just watched, leaning against the counter. The simple domesticity of the act felt momentous. The house was no longer just her space. It was a place I'd been invited into, truly and completely. We sat on her couch, a respectable distance between us, but the air was still charged. We talked for hours. This time, there were no walls. I told her about Marissa, about the slow, painful erosion of my confidence, the years I'd spent believing that my steadiness was a fatal flaw. I explained how Julian's condescension had been a direct hit on that old wound. She listened, her expression full of a deep, resonant empathy. And then she told me more about Julian, about the suffocating control that masqueraded as care, the constant pressure to maintain a perfect image for his colleagues and family. She talked about the relief and the terror of leaving, of starting over with nothing but her talent and her son. She painted a picture of a woman who had fought for her own stillness, her own quiet space, and I understood her on a level that felt tectonic. We were two people who had been misunderstood in opposite ways. He for being too quiet, she for refusing to be. He thought my strength was an argument, she said, swirling the wine in her glass. He couldn't understand that it was just me. He wanted someone he could protect, and I didn't need protecting. I just needed a partner. The word hung in the air between us. Partner. It was a word of weight and substance, a word I hadn't let myself consider for a very long time. As the night grew late, the conversation dwindled into a comfortable silence. We just sat together, listening to the house settle around us. It wasn't the awkward, tense silence of the past few days. It was a shared quiet, a space we were building together. When it was finally time for me to go, we stood at the door, the familiar threshold, now a place of new beginnings. So, I said, searching for the right words. What happens now? Now, she said, stepping forward and placing a light, confident kiss on my lips. You go home. And tomorrow, you and I are going to go out. A real date. No assembling furniture, no investigating phantom noises, and no ex-husband allowed. A date. I repeated, the word feeling foreign and wonderful. Okay, a date. I'll even let you pick the place, she said with a grin. As long as it's not a hardware store. I walked back to my house under a sky full of stars, feeling like a completely different man than the one who had walked the same path just a few hours earlier. The quiet of my own home didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. It felt like the calm before a beautiful, welcome storm. I had spent years building walls to keep the world out, and in one evening, a woman with perceptive eyes and a wry smile had not only breached them, but she'd made me see that they were a prison, not a fortress. And she'd done it by inviting me into a room with no sound, just to hear what I had to say. Our first real date was 3 nights later. I picked a small, unpretentious restaurant downtown, a place with exposed brick walls and food that was honest and good. It was the kind of place that didn't need to shout to be heard. It felt like us. Seeing her walk toward me on the sidewalk outside the restaurant was a revelation. She wore a simple black dress, and her hair was down. She wasn't a harried mother or a woman battling an ex. She was just Clara, and she was beautiful. My heart did that same stupid, clumsy lurch it had in her kitchen. I was beginning to think I'd have to get used to it. You clean up nice, Woodfellow, she said, her eyes sparkling as she took in my button-down shirt and non-work-dusted jeans. You're not so bad yourself, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. No sign of lukewarm coffee or Jell-O salad. I'm impressed. The evening was easy, so incredibly easy. The witty banter that had been our first language was still there, but now it was layered with something deeper. An undercurrent of shared understanding. We talked about everything and nothing. Bad movies, our favorite books, the time Sam tried to build a rocket out of a cardboard box and the garden hose. I found myself watching her more than eating. The way she gestured with her hands when she was making a point. The way she'd bite her lip when she was thinking. The full, uninhibited sound of her laugh, which made people at other tables turn and smile. She was vibrantly, incandescently alive. And she was here with me. The idea was still so new, so fragile. I was almost afraid to touch it. As we walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air, I instinctively reached for her hand. My fingers brushed against hers, and she didn't pull away. She laced her fingers through mine, a simple, definitive gesture that sent a current of warmth straight on my arm. Her hand felt small and capable in mine. It felt right. We walked for a while, our joined hands swinging between us. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The city hummed around us, a backdrop to our shared quiet. This was the stillness she had talked about, but it wasn't solitary anymore. It was a duet. This is nice, she said softly, squeezing my hand. Yeah, I said, my voice a little thick. It is. The date ended on our doorstep. The same doorstep where we'd first met, where Julian had performed his smug peacock routine, where we'd agreed to this date. It felt like a stage where the scenes of our story were playing out. I had a really good time tonight, Leo, she said, turning to face me. The porch light cast a soft glow on her face, making her eyes seem impossibly deep. Me too, I said, more than I can say. The air was thick with expectation. The first kiss had been a catalyst, an explosion. This was different. This was a confirmation. I leaned in, and she met me halfway. The kiss was slower this time, less about breaking down walls and more about exploring the space we had created. It was tender and sure, a promise of more nights like this. When I pulled away, she was smiling. So, about that standing offer for lukewarm coffee, she said. I think it's officially been upgraded to pretty decent morning coffee, if you're interested. I'm very interested, I said, my own smile feeling wide enough to split my face. And so, our lives began to merge in small, careful increments. It started with coffee. Most mornings, I'd wake up, make a pot, and carry 2 mugs across the lawn. We'd sit on our front steps, watching the neighborhood wake up, the steam from our cups mingling in the cool air. We'd talk about our plans for the day, a client meeting for her, a tricky joinery problem for me. It became our ritual, a quiet anchor in the morning. Then came the small acts of domestic integration. A book of mine, a biography of a famous furniture designer, appeared on her nightstand. A tube of her ridiculously expensive-looking hand cream showed up next to my sink. She claimed my favorite gray hoodie as her own, wearing it around her house on cool evenings. Each small item was a breadcrumb, marking a trail between our two separate worlds. My relationship with Sam deepened too. He was a bright, inquisitive kid, and once he realized I wasn't going anywhere, he started treating me less like a neighbor and more like a fixture. He'd show up at my workshop, his eyes wide with wonder at the saws and planers. I taught him how to sand a piece of wood until it was smooth as glass, how to tell the difference between oak and pine by the smell. We built a birdhouse together, a slightly crooked but deeply loved project that he proudly installed in his backyard. One afternoon, he asked me, with the bluntness only a child can muster, "Are you my mom's boyfriend?" I was in the middle of gluing a chair leg, and I almost dropped it. Clara and I hadn't used that word. We were just us. We were Leo and Clara. The labels felt too small, too conventional for what was growing between us. "I'm a good friend of your mom's," I said carefully. "And I'm your friend, too. Is that okay?" He considered this for a moment, his brow furrowed. "Okay," he said finally, "but boyfriends help with homework. Can you help me with my solar system diorama? Mine looks more like a bunch of moldy meatballs." I spent the next 2 hours helping him craft a passable Saturn out of a styrofoam ball and a cardboard ring. As I watched him carefully paint the stripes on Jupiter, I felt a surge of affection so strong it almost knocked me off my feet. This was part of her world. This amazing, funny, brilliant kid. And he was letting me in. Julian remained a persistent, low-grade hum of conflict in the background. His weekend pickups and drop-offs were always tense. He'd make passive-aggressive comments, thinly veiled digs at my profession or my quiet nature. He once saw me helping Clara carrying groceries and remarked, "Good to see you're still finding the help useful, darling." In the beginning, comments like that would have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt. But now they barely registered, because after he would leave, Clara would turn to me, roll her eyes, and we'd share a look of perfect, conspiratorial understanding. His words had no power because she had disarmed them. My sense of self was no longer tied to the opinions of others. It was anchored in her perception of me. She saw me as strong, so it was that simple. One Saturday, Julian overstepped. He arrived an hour early to pick up Sam, catching us in the middle of planting a small vegetable garden in Clara's backyard. My hands were covered in dirt. Clara had a smudge of mud on her nose, and Sam was gleefully watering my boots. We were a messy, happy unit. Julian stood on the edge of the patio, his pristine shoes a stark contrast to our earthy chaos. Well, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Playing house. How quaint." Clara straightened up, her expression hardening. "You're early, Julian." "Am I?" he said, feigning surprise. He looked at me, a cruel smirk on his face. "I just wanted to have a word with the gentleman of the house." Man to man, I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. I could feel Clara tense beside me, ready to spring to my defense. But I put a calming hand on her arm. This time it was my turn. "What can I do for you, Julian?" I asked, my voice even and calm. "I just want you to understand something," he said, taking a step closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial growl. "Clara has expensive tastes, and Sam is going to a private school that costs more than your truck. This little rustic fantasy you're living is sweet, but it's not reality. She needs a provider, not a gardener." It was a blatant attempt to intimidate me, to frame their relationship in purely financial terms, an area where he knew he had the advantage. He expected me to get angry, to get defensive, to prove his point that I was out of my depth. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable, and then I smiled. A small, genuine smile. "You really don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice full of a pity that I truly felt. "You think this is about money. You see her as a collection of expensive tastes that need to be funded. But Clara isn't a balance sheet. She's a person. I gestured to the messy garden, to Sam who was now trying to build a dam out of mud. You see a rustic fantasy. I see her teaching her son where food comes from. I see her creating a home with her own two hands. You see me as a gardener. She sees me as a partner. You've known her for more than a decade, and you don't know her at all. And honestly, I just feel sorry for you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't posture. I just laid out the truth as I saw it, calmly and deliberately. My stillness, once my greatest insecurity, was now my greatest weapon. Julian was speechless. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. He had come expecting a fight, a show of primitive male aggression. He had no protocol for quiet, cutting pity. He had been so thoroughly and calmly dismissed that he had no idea how to respond. Finally, he just shook his head, muttered something to Sam about being in the car, and retreated, his arrogant stride looking distinctly less confident than before. I turned back to Clara. She was staring at me, her eyes wide. There was awe in them, and something else, something so full of love it made my breath catch. "What?" I asked a little self-consciously. She didn't say anything. She just launched herself at me, wrapping her arms around my neck and kissing me, hard. It was a messy, muddy, glorious kiss. "That," she said, pulling back, her face beaming. "That was the single most attractive thing I have ever seen." I felt a grin spread across my face. In that moment, standing in the dirt, I had never felt more solid, more sure of who I was and where I belonged. I was Leo. I was a craftsman. I was a partner. And I was home. 2 years passed. 2 years of coffee on the front steps, of homework help and woodworking lessons, of navigating the choppy but manageable waters of co-parenting with Julian. He was still a part of their lives, a recurring, annoying appointment, but he was no longer a threat. He was just background noise. The quiet we had built together was too strong for him to penetrate. The invisible line between our two houses had long since been erased. My toothbrush had a permanent home in her bathroom, and her ridiculously oversized collection of mugs had staged a successful coup of my kitchen cabinets. We hadn't had a formal conversation about moving in together. It just happened. One day, I realized I hadn't slept in my own bed in 3 months, and we both just sort of shrugged and accepted that my house was now an extension of my workshop. Our life was a tapestry woven from quiet moments. Cooking dinner together while Sam explained the plot of his latest favorite video game. Me reading in a chair while she sketched at her drafting table, the only sound the scratch of her pencil on paper. Falling asleep with her head on my chest, her breathing a steady, comforting rhythm against my own. It wasn't the loud, spontaneous adventure Marissa had craved, but it was a deep, resonant, and profoundly joyful life. It was the stillness I had always had, but now it was shared. It was a home. One Saturday afternoon in October, I was in her bedroom, our bedroom now, installing the final shelf in a set of custom-built bookcases I'd made for her. They were walnut, my favorite, the grain dark and rich, and they fit the wall as if they had grown there. It was my gift to her, a permanent, solid, beautiful piece of me in the most personal room of our home. She came and stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, just as she had that first day when I'd assembled Sam's bed. She was watching me work, a soft, contemplative smile on her face. "It's beautiful, Leo," she said. "Perfect. Only the best for my client," I said, tapping the shelf to make sure it was secure. She walked over, running a hand over the smooth, oiled surface of the wood. "I have a question for you," she said, her tone shifting slightly, becoming more serious. "Anything," I said, turning to give her my full attention. "Will you marry me?" The drill I was holding slipped from my fingers and clattered to the floor. I just stared at her, my mind a complete and total blank for the second time since I'd met her. The first had been in this very room, when she called me out on my silence. Now, she was doing it again, cutting through all the noise, all the convention, with one direct, beautiful, terrifying question. "Are you? Is this?" I stammered, unable to form a coherent thought. I'd been planning it myself, of course. I had a ring, A simple, elegant band I designed, not flashy, but solid, hidden in a box in my workshop. I was waiting for the perfect moment, fussing over the details, as was my nature. And here she was, just cutting to the chase as was hers. She laughed, a bright, wonderful sound. Yes, Leo, I'm serious. I know you've probably been engineering some elaborate, perfectly constructed plan to ask me, but I got impatient. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. I want to keep upgrading our coffee and building crooked birdhouses and fighting about who gets the last of the good ice cream. It's that simple. I looked at her, this incredible, strong, witty woman who had seen me from the very beginning, who had looked at my quiet, cautious life and seen not a flaw, but a foundation. She hadn't fixed me. She had seen me, and in doing so, had given me the courage to fix myself. I knelt down, not because of some grand romantic gesture, but because my knees felt weak. I picked up the drill, set it aside, and then took her hand in mine. Yes, I said, my voice thick with an emotion so powerful it felt like it could split my chest open. Of course, yes. My only condition is that I get to ask you tomorrow, so I can use the ring I've been hiding for a month. Tears welled in her eyes, and she pulled me to my feet, her arms wrapping around me in a fierce, tight hug. Deal, she whispered in my shoulder. We stood there for a long time, holding each other, surrounded by the scent of walnut and the quiet hum of the life we had built. I looked at the bookcases, solid and permanent. I thought about the first time I'd stood in this room, a stranger investigating a non-existent sound, a man so walled in he couldn't see a way out. Life wasn't about avoiding the messy, complicated parts. It was about finding the one person you wanted by your side to navigate them with. It wasn't about being safe. It was about being seen. Truly, completely seen. And in the quiet stillness of that room, held in the arms of the woman I was going to marry, I knew I had finally found my way home. Have you ever been so guarded from a past hurt that you almost missed out on something wonderful? What would you have done if you were in my shoes when she called me into that quiet room? Tell me your story in the comments. I'd love to hear about a time someone saw the real you. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.